C.Simmons with you here on the 29th day of July in the year of our Lord 2018. And it's a big weekend. It's the weekend in which, the major preps leading up to the Midsummer Derby, the Travers Stakes, have been conducted. And it's also tempered with the fact that this week, in the Wednesday, July the 25th, 2018, in the year of our Lord, our Triple Crown winner, Justify, was retired from racing. It was announced by WinStar Racing, WinStar Farms, Starlight Racing, in partnership with China Horse Club and trainer Bob Baffert, that the ankle issues that were giving Justify problems, the progression or the projected time that he could recover was not sufficient enough to get him ready for a lot of the big events. Obviously, the Haskell, which was conducted on podcast day today, on July 29, 2018, was off the table, along with the Travers and subsequent events that could be, useful preps to the Breeders' Cup, in which Justify would have had an opportunity to complete the Grand Slam, which of course comprises the Triple Crown races and the Breeders' Cup Classic. All of those opportunities for Justify to enhance his impeccable 6-for-6 resume are, of course, off the table, and he will not have the opportunity to do that, to make his Triple Crown resume even sparkle even to a greater degree. So that's an unfortunate situation based on the way the business and the economics of it works. When you win the Triple Crown, you're much too valuable a commodity. I mean, the benefits of the breeding shed outweigh staying on the racetrack. And unfortunately, even though this was an injury that was probably treatable, to where even if he couldn't have made the Breeders' Cup, he could have run as a 4-year-old. Once you win the Triple Crown, or even have a resume of a higher level resume, the chances of you being retired are probably greater than you staying on the racetrack as a 4-year-old without even winning the Triple Crown. So that's been kind of the underbelly, the undercurrent, versus Justify actually having an opportunity to race after the Triple Crown. Bob Baffert said the week after the Triple Crown was secured and sealed and delivered, that the intent was on racing, which is basically code word for there's probably retirement is as good of a candidate as continuing to run them. So that was the big news prior to the first of a trio of top-end preps for the Midsummer Derbies, the Travers. That would be the Curlin Stakes, named after the two-time Horse of the Year and two-time winner of the Woodward over the Saratoga Oval. That race, again, like the other races that we're going to talk about, run at 9 furlongs over the sealed Saratoga surface. Rain had been wreaking havoc all day, and it had been playing to speed. And Hofberg is a come-from-behind horse. He was the feature horse, third place in the Belmont behind Justify's successful Triple Crown bid. Ran a very good race. He was 7th in the Kentucky Derby. He punched his ticket to Louisville via a very, very nice second-place finish to Audible in the Florida Derby. So with Hofberg, being the overwhelming favorite, the question was going to be if he was going to live up to that. He won by 5 lengths in 150.18 over the mile and an eighth. It was a workmanlike, if not spectacular, performance. It was just that, a prep that Bill Mott, his conditioner, felt that he needed. And at this point in the game, for those in support of Hofberg, what you're hoping for is an upward flight going into the Travers, that you will run even better than you did at the mile and an eighth at the added distance of 10 furlongs. So we'll have to see. Hofberg has been an overcooked horse since his Florida Derby run in terms of the potential and what he was going to do. We just don't know how good he is, or if he's that good at all. And that's the point that, as I aforementioned in the beginning of this, is the $64 or the multiple $64 questions, and Hofberg's one of them. Is he really suited to a mile and a quarter? Is he a horse that can win, go on a winning streak, or be the kind of horse that's going to run these, dynamic, put out dynamic performances each and every time? Consistency is one thing, superstar type level performances is another, and we're going to find out where these 3-year-olds, in the absence of Justify, fit. And that's not only applies to Hofberg, but as I said, in this multitude of $64 questions, it also points to the horses that competed in the Jim Dandy the following day on Saturday. $600,000, a Grade 2 race over the Saratoga Oval, just like the Curlin. And it's more of a staple. It's been there for years and years. Some horses have actually, like Thunder Rumble, for example, won both the Jim Dandy and Travers Street, since accomplished the same feat in 2007. It's a difficult double to win, but it has been a race that, like a lot of Kentucky Derby preps that bear the same distinction, horses have, run in the top 3, top 4, and have built on that, and then have been successful to get their picture taken in the winner's circle in the Travers. So the Jim Dandy bears that distinction. $600,000. This race, of course, featured two sons of Curlin. Curlin, the 2007 Horse of the Year, for which the Curlin Stakes is named, and the 2008 Horse of the Year, two-time Woodward winner. His sons have been doing very well, and he had two of them in this race. Tenfold, the third-place finisher in the Preakness, fifth in the Belmont Stakes, when futility running behind Justify, and Vino Rosso, who ran fourth in that same Belmont Stakes and was the winner of the Wood Memorial at Aqueduct. Finished ninth in the Kentucky Derby. Sustained what we would call surface injuries, a lot of mud in his face, and it took a little while to get all the mud out of his eye. He was freshened up for the Belmont. He ran a very credible fourth, and we'll talk a little bit more about that performance when ranking these top 10 3-year-olds in the absence of Justify. That system is being obviously readjusted with his retirement, and we'll talk about that. But these three horses were in here. What was interesting was Vino Rosso really didn't show a lot of interest in the stretch run. It looked like he was going to finish dead last. He was floundering, that he wasn't getting over the surface, and that could be the case when the information via his rider, John Velasquez, and trainer Todd Pletcher comes out. It'll be disclosed as to what was really going on. But once, we get down to the last half furlong, he kicked in and made up a ton of ground, almost got the second spot to Flame Away, a horse that we know had finished ahead of Vino Rosso down in Tampa Bay in the preps leading up to the Derby down there, where Vino Rosso kind of disappointed. And Flame Away was the speed in the race, and Tenfold, who was sort of a tepid co-favorite with Vino Rosso, third in the Preakness, fifth in the Belmont, trained by Steve Asmussen. He decided to use more pace-pressing tactics in this race, which was very, very interesting, because in the Preakness, which was his best race career-wise, like Justify and Magnum Moon, both of whom are now retired, Magnum Moon sustaining that injury a little bit earlier this summer at Belmont Park, in that Arkansas Derby, where he ran against Magnum Moon, he finished fifth. This was his attempt to get into the Triple Crown mix. He didn't quite qualify. Skipped the Derby, ran well in the Preakness, and those tactics in the Preakness, again, as a lightly raced horse, no 2-year-old racing, where the skies, are seemingly blue for him. He ran very, very well. In the Belmont, he tried to be what most horses should be, a little bit tactical, and it didn't quite go as well, for him. It's interesting that the reporters believe Vino Rosso couldn't get the distance. Well, what's Tenfold's excuse? He finished fifth. He finished behind Vino Rosso. And I'll tell you what that excuse is and how legitimate I think or don't think that it is. But the point is that Tenfold didn't run as well in the Belmont. This was his first out since then, running against his fellow half-brother in Vino Rosso. And he wins this race in 150.49. The interesting thing about it, as I said before, was Vino Rosso not only seemingly floundering on the track and about to finish last, making up all this ground, but was the winner. Is Tenfold decided to employ those tactics, and he ended up almost biting the bullet in the stretch. He really tired out, and he also drifted almost all the way out to the outer rail with the Saratoga grandstand, and it looked more like he was interested in getting hot dogs and sharing liquor drinks and getting blunted with the Saratoga attendants than sticking to staying, focused at the front of the racetrack. But according to Steve Asmussen and his rider Ricardo Santana, the horse got distracted by the tote board or by the video screen, or perhaps what I aforementioned, people drinking and smoking and doing all the things that fans having a good time at the racetrack were doing. But this is something that is going to cannot be an issue in the Travers. Number one, it can get you disqualified whether you win, lose, or draw, and can impact the race and be dangerous. Number two, it certainly doesn't help your chances to win a race like the Travers or subsequently any of the other big events, which includes the Breeders' Cup Classic, if Tenfold can qualify by running well enough. And he, in this race, it's a free roll of the dice being a prep. It isn't the Travers, no more than if he had done this in the Arkansas Derby prior to the Kentucky Derby. Let's see if we can develop the horse, develop a bit of a style, see if we can build off of it. It also allows him to, as Asmussen would say, blow out the lungs and get a fitness test. Now, whether that's going to backfire and crash and burn on him going into the Travers, where you have no horse left after employing these tactics, where you're not fit but you're fatigued, you're more fatigued than fit, that's going to be, as I said, another one of those $64 questions. There is a good possibility that even despite these royal, regal, and coveted pedigrees, and particularly the one that I'm talking about, tenfold being by Curlin, just like Vino Rosso and just like Good Magic, who we're going to talk about here in a couple seconds, another son of Curlin. It's interesting that, I think that people become marinated and become enamored and hypnotized by those pedigrees, and it can have an overbearing in influencing you in terms of how far a horse can run. And sometimes horses just don't want to. You have to look at the analytics for what it is, the running style, and how the horse reacted. And right now, there's a question mark on whether Tenfold can get the 10 furlongs. Some would say, well, Vino Rosso didn't win either, but he was coming on in the stretch. But that's another trap. Closing horses have a tendency to, be looked at as prime candidates to want the added distance. And sometimes the added distance just makes it that much more difficult to come from behind and make up ground. And as Jerry Bailey, our esteemed colleague at NBC, once said, there's something about closers, and I'm paraphrasing, closers winning a lot. It's very, very rare. And so to quote Jerry directly, because number one, you got to overcome pace or get pace and then overcome traffic. So it's very, very tough for a dead deep closer to win a lot. It's not impossible for them to get checks, though, and hit the board. And Vino Rosso is probably one of those kind of horses. I really think that, to me, it felt like that he's ready to run in the Travers, that he will appreciate the distance, but I just don't know if he's tactically going to be able, even if Tenfold gets first run or anyone else in this race, he's going to be able to make up the ground to not only win but hit the board. And will he have that turn of foot that he had in the final stages of the Jim Dandy and the Travers? That's what I'm interested in, because he looked pretty good in the final stages, yet there's this diatribe, particularly amongst the New York press, that believed that Vino Rosso couldn't get the distance in the Belmont, and that, he came on late after horses tired out, and that there was an excuse for Tenfold after running these fractions against Flame Away, that he could be excused for getting tired. But I think that, anyone with any, common logic would say, you don't want to be drifting out that far, no matter how tired you get, because as I said before, you run the risk of getting other horses hurt. You run a tremendous, you compromise your chance or you certainly enhance your chances of having your number taken down. And not only that, last but not least, when you run this way, changing your tactics, this would indicate that this is not really, I think, the ideal strategy or the most useful one for Tenfold. I think as his career develops, barring injury, that could be useful. But I'm not so sure, no matter what the tactics, I'm not completely confident if we're not going to see what we've seen in the last couple of years. Horses from the Triple Crown not running particularly well in the Travers. We saw Exaggerator get roasted. But again, they could be excused. Exaggerator and Gunrunner and Creator, those horses, Nyquist, the Derby winner, skipped that Travers in 2016, where they just got absolutely destroyed by, a tour de force, this sort of James Bond-like supernatural performance by Arrogate. But still, they were well beaten compared to, the previous year, where Always Dreaming, Cloud Computing, the Derby and Preakness winners, respectively, didn't run so well in the Belmont Stakes. And they just didn't show up. And it was very, very interesting. And so what could be going on here is that these Triple Crown horses do not perform, that the rigors of that will take its toll ultimately in the Travers. This year it feels like it's a little less likely to happen, because the horses that have been stars on this whole interplanetary magic carpet ride that's been headed by Justify seemingly, at least ran to somewhat their form here. I do think that Tenfold, I've said before that I'm not so sure, and I've said this for many weeks, if a lot of these horses are as tailor-made to get the mile and a quarter as a lot of people would think. I think, is like I said, I'm not going to get completely caught up in Vino Rosso making up the ground that he did. It was at a mile and an eighth. He was fortunate in this field to be able to not only make up the ground, but get a piece of the check, to get a piece by finishing third. In the Travers, in a bigger field, and the possibility, there's a good chance somebody's going to be ready to run a really good race. you might not be so fortunate when not being engaged or having a problem with the racetrack or whatever issue was going on with Vino Rosso that day. So he's going to have to, number one, be able to make a decisive move and be able to finish strongly at 10 furlongs. And everybody believes with that Curlin pedigree he can do that. But it's interesting that he's the Curlin that can't go a mile and a quarter. He's the Curlin that couldn't go a mile and a half, yet he finished ahead of Tenfold at the 12 furlongs. What was Tenfold's excuse? And there have been a myriad of them. For whatever reason, there are certain press corps that like Tenfold a little bit more. And I don't know whether it's maybe they like Steve Asmussen more than Todd Pletcher, because I don't see any, these are distinctions without much difference. I don't see much difference between these two horses. So with that, that's code word for it. There are doubts on or clouds hanging above both of these horses, and particularly with Tenfold bolting out in the stretch the way he did. It reminded people a lot of what Sporting Chance, who was in this Jim Dandy field, who ran poorly, by the way. Once again, he's probably going to have to cut back in distance for Wayne Lucas. It reminded people of that. He didn't quite bolt out as sharply as Sporting Chance did, but this was something that is certainly in the disturbing category, and it's enough of a disturbing potential disaster that you have to be concerned about that. So that's an issue right there. The running time, once again, 150.49 for the Jim Dandy. Again, I don't think Tenfold or Vino Rosso are going to get enough support to be the favorite, but there will be some money taken in. I like Vino Rosso to be a grinder. I actually think that versus the excuse that everyone gave that Tenfold, who finished behind him in fifth in the Belmont, because he didn't get the right trip, which I think is really an overstep. Even if you look at that tape, at 12 furlongs, even if you can't get your act together, or if things don't unfold ideally in the first furlong and a half, you've got 10 and a half furlongs to get your strategy straight. So, there really aren't as many excuses on a racetrack with the width and the configuration that Belmont Park has. I mean, and so, traffic issues are a little bit less prevalent at 12 furlongs in a race with that kind of, on a racetrack with the width of Belmont at that distance versus the Kentucky Derby, a 20-horse cavalry charge like the Derby. So that's the difference. And I think that it's pretty clear that Tenfold had every opportunity to make a run at Justify. And he just ran evenly the whole way, never really threatened, really made a move. At least Vino Rosso tried to make a move on the turn. So for people to say that he didn't get the mile and a half is an overstep, because it wasn't for lack of trying. He engaged Justify, but Justify, breathed that ungodly Godzilla-like fire on him and incinerated and roasted both John Velasquez and horse. And that was the end of him. But the interesting thing was, like I said before, that right in the minutes after Justify secured the Triple Crown, that one thing about Vino Rosso, he ran hard. He came back, he re-engaged, he tried to, get back in the race, couldn't outrun Justify, but battled as hard as he could with Gronkowski, who had that great run, and Hofberg, who only slightly outran him. He ran a very, very good race, the kind of race that if we had more 12 furlong races carded in North America, Vino Rosso would be a prime candidate to get a second chance and a prime candidate to improve upon that. Now, we'll never know that unless he starts to run in turf events, because as we all know, as Wayne Lucas said, people don't even care about mile and a half horses anymore. So it's a dying format. The Belmont is usually the one and only time a horse gets to run that far. Vino Rosso showed more interest to run that far than Tenfold did. Yeah, people just said that he couldn't get the mile and a half. And yet Tenfold finished behind him. As I said, I don't believe in that the trip was what cost him. I really think Tenfold is the one that is going to struggle. If they both struggle, they struggle. But some tells me that Tenfold may not be able to get 10 furlongs. I just don't think that he is as good a candidate to get it running the way that he did in the Jim Dandy. I think if there's some pace in there, or even if it's a little bit moderate to soft, he needs to sit back. I think that, the horse that we're getting ready, which leads us to the horse that we're getting ready to talk about, who is more capable and of doing those kind of things tactically, and that's Good Magic. Good Magic, the winner of the Haskell today on podcast afternoon, and he was very convincing. In this race, the speed did not develop any more than it was supposed to in the Belmont against Justify with Noble Indy. And in this race, the speed didn't really get out there on the first. I guess they weren't interested in running, even though there was $1 million purse. Maybe some horses, money isn't everything. But they didn't get out there, and Good Magic, who was going to be forwardly placed on some level anyway, was able to inherit the second spot. And instead of getting in the kind of duel that he got in with Justify, or feeling more comfortable in the fact that Godzilla wasn't there, he was able to move into the second slot and not really, force himself to get into a pace set scenario, a pace battle, or not really just suddenly take the lead in the race and dare anyone to catch him. He sat there, he relaxed very, very nicely, and then he made his good magic move. And as I said before, all these Curlins, he, like Tenfold and Vino Rosso's by Curlin, the key is that are they going to perform like their sire at some level? Are they going to get to the Curlin level or somewhere in thereabouts? And so with good magic is the another $64 question is he going to be good and is he going to be magic? And today he ran with a little bit of that magic, not something of the constellations, not something of that freaky Holy Bull, Ghost Zapper, Street Sense, Fusaichi Pegasus. He didn't run that kind of silver charm kind of race, but he ran a very workmanlike time, the time 150.10, a little tick of a bit, faster than Hofberg, but nothing to really, nothing that tantalizes and tingles the spine. These times have been holding court all year long. Earlier in the year, there were a lot of journalists out there, casual observers, nuance fans that felt that the times were a little slow, the buyers might not be, spectacular. And my belief was, and I think a lot of people believe, that horses, 3-year-olds, get better as the year goes along. But right now, everyone's holding court. Nothing has really changed. It's almost like these 3-year-olds are spinning their wheels. It could be excused that Good Magic hasn't run since the Preakness Stakes and his almost match race for the large majority of the Preakness, the middle jewel of the Triple Crown, against Justify. So he runs a little bit better time. I can't say that Good Magic needs to improve. Collectively, when you look at these 150 times, there's an opportunity for another horse to jump up and run that monster race the way that Arrogate did, the way that West Coast came in. Bob Baffert has been basically the perpetrator of those crimes the last 2 years. Does he have something in reserve? Obviously, right now, it looks like McKenzie, who he announced is on the comeback trail, that he looks fantastic. The horse that was supposed to run in the Santa Anita Derby after winning the Sham, winning the San Felipe, disqualified against Bolt d'Oro, was going to be one of the favorites. Justify was supposed to run in the Arkansas Derby against another unraced 2-year-old that was coming to hand in Magnum Moon. That's where he was supposed to go until he came in and took McKenzie's place upon injury, which took McKenzie, the son of Street Sense, off the Triple Crown Trail, the classic trail, and began what Michael Vrona described as he approached the wire when, smoking Bolt d'Oro, his dizzying ascension into greatness. So McKenzie is a horse that I believe is better than all these horses. But again, you can't go on his previous form. It gives us clues, but right now, given the layoff, you cannot go on his previous form any more than people can, judge or talk about justifying what his potential is, knowing he's a retired racehorse. Now you have to judge him on what he's going to do as a stallion and how his progeny and his offspring perform. Same thing with American Pharaoh, whose progeny and offspring have been, a very huge point of interest in the sales this spring and summer, and certainly will basically be at the top of the headlines during the fall as well and into the winter, because his first group of foals have been coming out and they've been doing very well. But the question will be how they will do once the saddle and the tax put on them and horse and rider are supposed to be married as one. So we'll have to wait and see. But McKenzie is very, very interesting. This goes to my question. After these preps, in which you can obviously point to the favorites, but certainly not point to the superstar, it's wide open. Good Magic is the favorite, no question. But in my box here, Bob Baffert, does he have a contender? Does anyone have a contender that can trump these horses? The door is open for not only these 3-year-olds to jump up and emerge, but for someone else to come in and trump all of what's been done in these preps. Not going to be an easy thing. Gronkowski, who comes out of the Chad Brown barn, stablemate of Good Magic, he's been on a layoff. He's had another setback similar to the one that he had when he had the infection that took him out of the Kentucky Derby after being the winner or the champion of the most points for the Road to the Derby from Europe. He was, the top, rated horse there with the most points. And, of course, Mendelssohn got off the trail. He won one of those races, but won the UAE Derby, which was an 100-point race. And it's interesting as to where Gronkowski's going to go. I think the Travers is probably a little less likely than not. Coming in off of works the way that Tappert did the previous year, 2017, coming into after winning the Belmont, into the Midsummer Derby off of just works is very That's a tall order. So I think for Gronkowski, the same would apply. He's had a setback since then. He's probably Chad Brown. We'll find out more about how he's doing. But I think making the Travers would be pushing it a little bit. Going a mile and an eighth in the Pennsylvania Derby may still be tough, but that might be more reachable. I see him as being a Jockey Club Gold Cup horse and also one in the future that will dabble in the turf. But Gronkowski's sort of on the outside looking in. McKenzie's probably not going to make it there. That's what's making the Pennsylvania Derby. If Bob Baffert, is is filling his Glock and he's got his holster, ready to sling, the gunsling, that's where we're going to see McKenzie, unless he does what I think could have happened with Justify had he not been retired, is find a conditions race, either at Del Mar or at Santa Anita Oak Tree, and put a plan in place. And that's another $64 question with McKenzie as well as the whole group, and particularly with the son of Street Sense, is Bob Baffert going to put together a plan, an accelerated, comprehensive plan in laser-light fashion that mirrors what happened in the first half of the year when putting together the 112 days from maiden to legend, that became Justified. Can he put together a plan similar to that 112 days of ascension to stardom? And that's going to be one of the more interesting things going on, in addition to sorting out in your mind who the favorite is. Now, in addition to that, Wonder Godot, who finished second to Mon Ami Girl, who is the #1 rated 3-year-old in North America. She's won the Kentucky Oaks. She's had this impeccable resume winning the Ashland Stakes. She won the Coaching Club American Oaks the previous week to this telecast. She's been the #1 3-year-old. She holds a win over Wonder Godot, who has since smashed males in Canada in the first 2 legs of the Canadian Triple Crown. Where does she go? A Triple Crown is a Triple Crown, whether you think the Canadian Triple Crown carries less prestige than the American version or the English version, the 2000 Guineas, the Epsom Derby, and the St. Leger. And it would be great to see another Triple Crown winner. The lady is a champ. So that's a scenario that would be great to have 2 Triple Crown winners in North America. But Mark Casse, who trains Flame Away, second in the Jim Dandy, who will likely get a cutback in distance by running in the Allen Jerkins. And we're going to talk a lot about Flame Away, as I have all year long. I think he's a horse that still has options, even if he may be somewhat limited in his scope distance-wise. But he ran well in the Jim Dandy. But he is the stablemate of Wonder Godot. She is going to run in the Travers unless otherwise noted, or unless there's a change and an audible call to go back to the Canadian Triple Crown, which I don't think anyone would be discouraged by. I think her going for the Triple Crown in Canada would be a really great thing. So if she doesn't run there in the Travers, that would be great to see her try for the Triple Crown up north. Having said that, though, her being in the Travers brings a dynamic. How will she fare? And I hate to use against the boys. That has a bit of a sexual connotation, and I think it's somewhat politically incorrect, although I cannot stand political correctness. It's way over the top. I always say running against males, running against colts, and that's what we're dealing with Wonder Godot. Not running against the boys. She's a woman, and this is, you know what I'm getting at. So you get the picture. So she's going to have an opportunity to run against males, a lot like what we frequently see in Europe. It's not as big a deal. It's a little bit more novel when it happens. So I think she likes the 1.25 miles. Will she like the surface? Can she handle the pace scenarios that are going to be put forth in front of her? And I think that there's a good chance she can probably be competitive. We'll just have to wait and see. But unless otherwise noted, she's, pencil her in for the Travers. Now, as in looking at the Travers field, who do you like? Well, Good Magic is the #1 horse in my rankings right now. Based on the Haskell, he's had an impeccable record. He's 3 for 8 in his career. He's been in the money 7 in all of his starts, with the exception of the Preakness. And the Preakness was a strong 4th place. I almost liken it to a 3rd place finish because, between horses 1 through 5, Justify, Bravazzo, Tenfold, Good Magic, and Good Lone Sailor, you're looking at a spread of less than 2 lengths. Very competitive race, and was overrated in terms of it being a weak performance by Justify. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the retirement podcast and what Justify is meant to racing, even though it came and went so quickly. But again, Good Magic is my #1. Hofburg is my #2. Not because I'm absolutely enthralled with either one of the top 2, but he ran a good race in the Curlin. He didn't bore out in the stretch, which is why, Tenfold drops down a little bit. Vino Rosso is my #3. That surprises a lot of people. Not because I'm overwhelmed with him, not because I'm enamored with him being by Curlin, but because I think he ran encouragingly enough that if he can get his mind on his business And if he can handle, things a little more smoothly in the Travers, I think he will do well at 10 furlongs. I'm not absolutely picking him to win that race. I'm not sure if he will really explode and sustain a great run. But if he can run like he did in the Belmont, and it's 10 furlongs, and he can close and be tactically in the same relative position at 10 furlongs and be fit enough, because the star horses do this without even us asking all these questions. You ask them, somewhat generically, but it's just something to keep the conversation going when this horse is going to show up and he's going to do some things that you didn't even think he could do or she could do. And with these horses, you have to ask more questions because the proof isn't there. The overwhelming evidence, the DNA is not suggesting, even with the pedigrees, that these horses can really thrive and do it multiple times. So with Vino Rosso, it would appear he's set up to run really strongly at 1.25 miles and really kick in at that distance and come home running and make a couple moves without it affecting his performance because the fitness and the brilliance is there, the way that a Victory Gallop would always just relentlessly close, or a Touch Gold or Empire Maker, just that lovely, ability to turn over their wheels and improve their stride. And so Vino Rosso showed that in the final stage of the Jim Dandy. Can he do it at 1.25 miles? But he's my number 3 simply because I think he could. I'm not really sure, but based on what's going on here, I think his performance in finishing third, almost getting the second spot from Flameway, was a little bit better than Tenfold, who, if he really was brilliant, would have bursted by Flameway and really cruised home in the smooth fashion that Good Magic and Hofburg did. So he drops down, even though his pedigree would indicate, being by Curlin, he can go 1.25 miles, which goes to my point. How legitimate is pedigree sometimes when you have a horse that, Aidan O'Brien made a great point. Elvis is, Elvis, we all know how great Elvis was, but it's just like, Elvis didn't have any brothers that could sing. So pedigree can be overrated when you look at it that way. I don't know if Elvis's cousins could sing or not, but I just don't think that they got anywhere near as famous as his brother to where it's talked about. I don't think he's got a brother who was a good bar lounge singer. So again, pedigree can be overrated. Elvis didn't have any brothers that can sing, and just because Tenfold is by Curlin does not automatically mean, based on what I saw in the Jim Dandy, that he's a sure bet to get the 10 furlongs, even though everyone seems to be more on a diatribe on Vino Rosso. And we're going to talk about that at length if I haven't talked about it too much tonight. So Bravazzo is my number 5. He's number 5 because he ran reasonably well. He was second best to Good Magic. He was never going to beat him. I'm not so, Jerry Bailey said that he was about as thin as an envelope, and that he's still looking like he's had a lot of wear and tear, that the wear and tear of the Triple Crown's taken something out of him. And it may come to crash and burn in the Travers somewhere down the line, but I got to give him credit for running a good 5th here. Lone Sailor finished third, a distant third. He's in the 6th spot, but it's tepid. I think he's still a horse. I'm not so sure the Travers is going to be where he lands. I don't think 1.25 miles is completely out of his scope, but I'm just not absolutely sure. But he maintained 6th. He ran a good race. Gronkowski's in the 7th spot. I'm not sure if that's an absolute surefire thing. Again, we just don't know what his schedule is like, and the inactivity. Just the Belmont is giving me the reason or the justification, to coin a phrase, to be there. I'm just not so sure just yet, where he's going to land. We don't know if it's a one-hit wonder, if it's a dud, or if he's going to consolidate this, but he's in good hands with Chad Brown. He's the number 7. Flame Away is my number 8, but just tepidly, just based on the Jim Dandy. That could change. He's certainly going to be one of the better speed horses, just like Promises Fulfilled. Dale Romans has already made the move to cut him back. He was very impressive in the Amsterdam, which is the local prep at Saratoga, for what used to be the King's Bishop. It's now called the Alan Jerkins, after the great Hall of Fame trainer, who's better known as the Giant Killer, because he beat Secretariat twice with 2 different horses. Flame Away is a horse that has a lot of options. I like him because, even if you don't think he can go 1 mile and an eighth, or that he's hard-pressed to do that, a little bit like Practical Joke for Chad Brown, he's still very handy. He's going to get you checks. So he's a horse that on the turf might be the best at 1 mile and an eighth. Might even be able to go 1 mile and a quarter against turf horses, because he's won on synthetic, dirt, and turf. Number 2, even if that's not completely the case, because you can never underestimate, I think there's great horses on the turf. It's not a second alternative. We all know it's the primary surface in Europe. But the point is that he's a horse that's very handy. Mark Casse can spot him in an 8 furlong, 8.5 furlong race, either on the dirt or the turf, can maybe stretch him to 9 in certain spots. I do think he does have some stamina. He might not be 1 mile and a quarter horse, but again, he could be developed. He's had a pretty demanding somewhat demanding campaign. Took time off after the Derby, didn't run so well in the Ohio Derby, came back. Now, be curious to see what his energy level is after this, but it might be tough to come back in a sprint against not so much promises fulfilled, but just coming back to run 7 furlongs. Sprinting is not easy either, but he's a horse that could be a Breeders' Cup Sprint dirt horse, maybe the Breeders' Cup. He could be in the sprint either on the dirt or the turf, or he could be in the mile races if he doesn't fit into the classic picture. And so I think there's a lot, the skies are bright for him. I've been saying this all year long since the Triple Crown Trail started. So he's my number 8, not maybe the strongest number 8, but he's, as a matter of fact, he's a very interesting horse. In Still Regard is now in the barn of Chad Brown, which is very interesting. It's a development that I kind of overlooked. He's in the barn of Chad Brown, just like Bolt d'Oro is now in the barn of Steve Asmussen. So whether these horses are going to be players or horses, parts on the chess table that these two trainers are going to use this year, certainly if they stay in training in 2019, these are going to be horses that you're going to be looking at to represent and carry the Chad Brown banner, as well as the Asmussen Blasi banner, because I call it Asmussen Blasi because Scott Blasi's played such a great role, an integral role in Steve Asmussen's success. So I don't even call it Steve Asmussen stable. It's Asmussen Blasi, and it'll be interesting to see where they put Bolt d'Oro and how he's going to fit in, whether it be immediate or in the future, because that's going to be the question on both these horses, whether in the immediate, in the acute phase, or later on in the game, they'll come to hand. But it gives them another option and another horse they can slot into some stake races without all the pressure being on, in Chad Brown's case, on Good Magic and Gronkowski, and in the case of Asmussen on Tenfold and Reride, who also did not run well in the Jim Dandy, but he's another one of his charges along with Combatant. So that just adds another horse to the Asmussen arsenal, and it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens. Now, from a musical chair standpoint, the Ortiz boys are going to probably be interchanging between Hofburg and Good Magic. Jose Ortiz is Good Magic's rider. Will probably stay there. He has ridden Hofburg before, so it'll be interesting. He does have a choice to make. Something tells me he's going to stay on the Haskell winner and Kentucky Derby runner-up and current and the juvenile champion from 2017. Meantime, like I said, this is a very, very, at this point, the division is wide open. I believe that, Good Magic has catapulted himself somewhat to the front for right now, but that's maybe the mixed bag that we might be getting, a group that will trade blows if there isn't one that will dominate. So we'll find out more about that as we continue to carry on with our reports, and we'll let you know and keep you posted on the latest on the Racing Report for 2018.